pleased to be joined once again by the president of the Small Business Association of Michigan, Brian Calley, to talk about the continued efforts of our small business community here in the Great Lakes State to recover from the pandemic and continue to shoulder the burden of an ongoing pandemic. Brian, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Tyler. Great to be with you again. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. So recently, WILX in Lansing had reported that according to a new survey, while wages and staffing levels have begun to increase once again back toward more normal levels, rising costs and staffing issues continue to be the top threats that businesses in our state are facing. Just how big of a threat are those two issues at this present moment, particularly for our small businesses in Michigan?
Especially for those businesses that were last to the table to rehire once the final restrictions were lifted. They are still struggling mightily. We've seen all kinds of reactions to it, wages and benefits increasing, sign-on bonuses, making different accommodations in the way work is done, but still really serious challenges in getting staffed back up in a way that maximizes the opportunity that's out there. There's just plenty of demand, and people are ready to get out there and re-engage on the consumer from a consumer standpoint. But severe restrictions in just the availability of help. But then on top of that, also we're starting to see supply chain issues starting to hit in all different types of businesses. So we heard about it like with microchips and automotive, but it's really permeating now through almost everything.
We're joined by Brian Calley. He's the president of the Small Business Association of Michigan with us today on the MegaCast. And also coming into play for Michigan's small businesses and small businesses across the U.S. are federal vaccine mandates that will be requiring either significant testing protocols or full vaccination of employees for businesses with at least 100 employees. Another survey that was recently conducted said that small business owners oppose that mandate by a margin of 2-1. What has been the reaction so far? What is the opinion generally across the board of people in your organization and small businesses in your organization in Michigan in terms of those vaccine mandates?
Now, most of our members have fewer than 100 employees, but I think it's important to keep in mind that it also applies to federal contractors, regardless of size, and also anybody who receives Medicaid or Medicare dollars. And so there are a lot of smaller companies that will fall under the mandate. I'll say, generally speaking, anytime the government gets between the employer and the employee in the hiring decisions and firing decisions, it is not received well from small business owners. So I think there's apprehension about asking them about medical issues, how you store information, what you're supposed to verify, what the lawful exceptions are, all the questions about testing, and it's not like you can get a test back right away. The over-the-counter more instant tests are not available in the type of way that they would need to be with such a wide mandate. So this was announced, but it has not been implemented. There's no rules that have come out. So we still have way more questions than answers on it. But I think one of the reasons why the rule set has not come out from the federal OSHA is because they are grappling with how to apply a private sector mandate of this size and have any hope at all of enforcing it. So there's apprehension, there's definitely opposition to it on a lot of different grounds, both philosophical from a standpoint of don't tell me who I have to hire and fire, but all the way through to practical considerations on, these testing lines sometimes can be very long. Whose time is that on? Can a person get a test and it takes a couple of days to come back? Can they work during that time period? All kinds of practical issues that small business owners will be confronted with, and I think rightfully are in a position where they don't need one more thing piled on to the difficulty in operating in this environment.
Yeah, practicality and logistics of enforcing or enacting these vaccine mandates in the workplace would be tough, because on top of arranging those testing protocols, should there be a situation where many of your employees in these small businesses, or most or all of your employees in the small business are not willing to get the vaccine, that can be very timely, that can be very costly in terms of materials. Will there be any support there? And then on top of that, in situations where people are willing to get vaccinated, how soon does that requirement need to go into place? Because that doesn't take a simple flip of the switch where all of a sudden you're vaccinated, unless you're getting the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and you wait through that simple gestation period there. You have to wait in some cases, especially with these 2-dose vaccines, for several weeks to be fully vaccinated under those mandates. So logistically speaking, those are some hurdles that businesses definitely have to be concerned about, but also that federal entities and OSHA need to also be considering as they put these final mandate rules into place. We're joined by Brian Calley, the president of the Small Business Association of Michigan, with us today on the MegaCast. And we talked earlier about wages increasing, staffing levels have begun to increase as well. But that brings up a topic I discussed earlier with Senator Rosemary Bayer about the increase in wages for child care workers and the incentive that brings, to have people continue to be retained in that industry, but also attract new people into child care as well. Generally speaking, those higher wages should be attracting more people to go back into the workplace, to apply for these jobs, to continue on with their jobs. But on the other end, too, just thinking logically, if you're increasing wages for business, that is increasing as an increased cost as well. How have those increased costs for staffing purposes to provide that additional pay, to provide that additional incentive, and to reward these employees for their great work? How has that affected businesses and their operations now as they continue through this pandemic and plan for what hopefully soon would be a post-pandemic future?
We've seen a lot of different types of responses, but I think an acknowledgement in trying to go, small business owners are trying to go right after right at the core of the issues and whatever the concerns of their employees are. So we do see loyalty bonus activity. We see wages and benefits being increased. We see more flexible scheduling, including remote work environments that weren't available before. These things are they're making some impact, although there is still a serious shortage. One of the reasons why, even if only say 5 or 10% of people end up not complying with the vaccine mandate, that still has a big impact on when the workforce is already as squeezed as it is. There's a concern that every one employee that decides that it's just not worth it anymore to work has kind of an outsized impact, given how tight things already are in the labor market. But the child care work is actually quite important. As we looked at the Department of Labor statistics on who has exited the workforce, younger parents, especially women, are one of the groups that have exited the workforce at a pretty high rate. Having availability of affordable, high-quality child care is important. There are several facets to it. To the extent that somebody is receiving a government subsidy, the reimbursement rates to the providers need to be in line with what is in the market, or else that help is not going to produce outcomes that inspire people to get back into the workforce. But also the income thresholds for who can get help needed to increase as well. I think they moved them up to 185% of poverty, which is pretty important. It gets it gets to families that are making between $40,000 and $50,000 a year. Often that's a spot where there's tremendous difficulty in covering the cost of childcare. But you don't qualify for much at that income level, and so making that change, I think, is going to make a big difference. So reimbursement rates to providers and increasing the income threshold where somebody could get some help will have some impact as well. It's a multifaceted issue, and getting the workforce built back up needs to be approached from a lot of different directions. So those are a couple of ways that I think there'll be some incremental progress made. But ultimately, overarching, I think that we definitely need the federal government to start normalizing their activities and stop spending and putting inflationary pressures into the system at a time, or acting like we're still at the bottom of the depression or the recession from the pandemic, and start managing and governing more like we have an economy that has a lot of demands and a lot of opportunity, and our fiscal policies need to start behaving that way.
We're joined by Brian Calley. He is the president of the Small Business Association of Michigan, joining us today on the MegaCast. And Brian, you were also selected recently as one of the co-chairs of the Protect Michigan Commission to help educate the people of Michigan on the COVID-19 vaccine. How are we doing across the board at the state level of providing that education to people? Because we still have very much been experiencing a lull in getting people to be vaccinated against COVID-19. We've obviously seen a severe rise in cases of the Delta variant of COVID-19 in the state of Michigan in the last month or two as well. What are your thoughts on the education efforts as it stands right now, and what more do we need to do to provide that education on the vaccines that are available to the people of our state?
At this point, it's really inching forward. I mean, the low-hanging fruit, people that just really, really wanted the vaccine or were very, had very kind of persuadable items, they just needed some questions answered, and then we're ready to go. All of those people are vaccinated. When an older income or older age groups, there's a pretty good or pretty high vaccination rate. That's good because it's the population that's most at risk for severe outcomes. But but Michigan really is a little bit below average in terms of the overall vaccination rate in our state, and there's starting to be quite a disparity between those that have higher income levels are highly vaccinated, and at lower income and lower education levels tend to be lower rates. And so what happens is, like in very urban areas and very rural areas, one thing they have in common is low vaccination rates. And so I think when you look at all the disparities that generally exist in our society, it's a real shame that on the vaccine front, that for some reason, that those that are left out most economically are also the ones choosing not to get vaccinated. And those that are most privileged economically are the ones who are choosing to get vaccinated. I think it's a real conundrum. And unfortunately, that outcome is exacerbating the life outcomes for people in different income brackets.
We're joined by Brian Calley. He's the president of the Small Business Association of Michigan, with us on the MegaCast today. And Brian, just another couple minutes with you before we'll say goodbye today. Anything else right now that's really important for our audience to know across the state about the state of our small businesses, what we can do to provide more for them, or what is available for people in the small business community to help them continue to recover and to weather this pandemic and the crisis that we're in?
Our biggest threats right now, they are coming from our federal government, unfortunately. There's a lot of talk about the size of the spending package in DC, $3.5 trillion. That I think that's problematic, and how big it is, and inflationary pressures. But how they are planning to change the tax code and also the way the IRS works, that is much more concerning to us. So the idea that they would be reporting transactions in and out of bank accounts, from bank and credit union accounts, almost every one of them, to the IRS, with the hopes of collecting $460 billion more in taxes, is problematic. Increasing capital gains and the inheritance tax. So when a small business leaves their business to that second generation, the second generation under the rules in this Build Back Better plan would, in most cases, have to sell their business to pay the taxes that are required. 43%. I mean, nobody keeps 43% of the value of their business in cash. And so there are lots of problematic aspects of this. And so we're really kind of in that defensive mode where we really need our federal government to lay off the very targeted negative impact that this plan will have on the small business community. I mean, they just cannot take any more hits. And I just gave a couple of examples. There are a bunch of other examples in this too that really go after small businesses. They keep on saying the wealthy, but keep in mind that small business owners have pass-through tax entities. So the business income, whether even though the income stays in the business and usually reinvested in growing and paying employees and that sort of thing, but it flows through and it shows on their personal tax return. Those people are called wealthy all the time, and they are not. And but this tax code would really hit small business owners in a big way. And so we're hopeful that they can lay off those items and just kind of normalize the federal government activities so that prices and inflation will settle down, our supply chain can get back on track, get out of the way of entrepreneurs, and they are going to be successful.
Well, Brian, we appreciate your time. Thanks for the update on the state of our small business community and what they're thinking as well as we continue through this pandemic, the vaccination efforts, the spending discussions at the federal level for the Build Back Better plan, and everything else that's currently a factor in the future of these businesses. We appreciate it.
Great to be with you again.